Nearly 7 miles below the surface of the Pacific Ocean, there is a place so deep that if you dropped Mount Everest into it, the entire mountain would disappear underwater, with over a mile to spare. The pressure down there is so intense, it would crush a steel car, the same way you crush an empty soda can with your hand. No sunlight has ever touched the bottom. No warmth from the surface ever reaches it. For most of human history, scientists assumed the deep ocean was basically empty, too hostile, too dark, too crushing, for anything meaningful to survive. They were wrong, in a way that changes everything. China sent a crew to the very bottom of the Mariana Trench, the deepest place on the entire planet. What they pulled back turned the scientific world completely upside down. Over 7,000 species that nobody on Earth had ever seen before. Entire ecosystems swaying in water that has never once seen the sun. Creatures running on chemistry instead of light. A hidden world that had been alive and thriving for millions of years, while we were up here assuming it was empty. But here is the part most people never hear. Right in the middle of all those discoveries, in the mud, at the very bottom of the earth, they found something else. Something that nobody was expecting. Something that changes the story in a completely different direction and leaves you with a question that is very hard to sit with. We will get to that. But first you need to understand why this place was considered completely unreachable and what China built to get there. The Mariana Trench sits in the western Pacific Ocean, roughly 200 miles southwest of a small American island called Guam. It is shaped like a long, curved scar on the ocean floor, stretching over 1,500 miles from one end to the other. At its lowest point, a spot called Challenger Deep, the ocean floor sits 36,037 feet down. That is almost 11 kilometers straight into the earth. To give you something to hold on to, picture the tallest building in the world. Now stack 120 of them on top of each other. That is roughly how far down we are talking. At that depth, the pressure from the water above is over 1,000 times greater than what you feel standing on the surface right now. It is roughly 8 tons pushing down on every single square inch. On your thumbnail alone, 3 full-sized cars stacked on top of each other, on every square inch of your body at once. You would not last even a second. The first humans to ever reach Challenger Deep did it in 1960. They rode down inside what was basically a steel ball attached to a giant floating tank filled with gasoline. They stayed at the bottom for 20 minutes, spotted a few slow-moving creatures near the mud, came back with 0 photos and 0 samples. Just what they remembered seeing with their own eyes. Then in 2012, the director of Titanic, James Cameron, went down in his own specially built submarine. He had cameras, he had sampling tools, he had technology those 1960 explorers could never have imagined. And when he got to the bottom, he described it as looking like the surface of the moon. Flat, gray, almost nothing moving, a few pale creatures near the seafloor. Not much else. So going into the 2010s, the picture the world had of the deepest place on Earth was this: cold, dark, empty, and barely worth the enormous risk it took to visit. Only 3 humans had ever been there in all of recorded history. Most scientists believed the extreme conditions made it too hostile for any meaningful life to exist in large numbers. That picture was about to be completely redrawn, and the country that rewrote it was not the one most people expected. Here is what most people will never hear about this story. While most of the world's scientific attention in the early 2000s was pointed upward, at outer space, at Mars, at the stars, China made a quiet but deeply ambitious decision. It turned its focus the other direction. Not up, down, way down. To the parts of the ocean so deep that light cannot reach. Pressure destroys metal, and almost nothing living there has ever been named. In 2002, China launched a national deep-sea exploration program with one goal: build a vehicle that could carry humans to 7,000 meters underwater and come back with real scientific data. Not a snapshot, not a quick visit. Real data that scientists could actually use. Building something like that is not straightforward. Every single part of the vehicle has to be engineered to survive conditions that would destroy regular machines. The outer shell has to hold against pressure that would flatten normal steel like paper. The electronics have to keep working in water near freezing point. The life support systems have to keep the crew breathing for hours, with no connection to the world above. And if something fails down there, there is no fixing it from the surface. There is no calling for help. There is no rescue. The first vehicle that came out of this program was called the Jiaolong. It means sea dragon. It took almost 10 years of designing, testing, breaking things, and rebuilding them before it was ready. In 2012, the Jiaolong reached 7,062 meters in the Mariana Trench. That made it the deepest diving manned vehicle on Earth at that moment, going deeper than anything built by the United States, Japan, France, or Russia. But here is the thing most people outside the scientific community completely missed. China did not treat that as the finish line. They kept going. They built a second vehicle called the Shanghai Yongxi, the Deep Sea Warrior. Faster, more reliable, better instruments. Scientists used it to explore mid-depth parts of the ocean and learn the techniques they would need for something far more ambitious. Then they built the one that would change everything, the Fendu. It means strive. It was designed from scratch to go all the way to the bottom of Challenger Deep and stay there long enough to actually do science. Not 20 minutes like the 1960 crew. Not a quick look and back up. Extended, careful, thorough exploration. It carried robotic arms that could scoop material off the seafloor, high-definition cameras, water collection equipment, instruments that could measure temperature and chemistry in real time right there at the bottom of the world. In less than 20 years, China had gone from having no deep-sea vehicle program at all to building 3 generations of increasingly powerful machines. And the Fendu was ready to go all the way down. What they found when they got there is where this story stops being about engineering and starts being about something much larger. On November 10, 2020, the Fendu descended to 10,909 meters inside Challenger Deep. 3 crew members sat inside a titanium sphere roughly the size of a small bathroom, sealed off from everything outside, while the vehicle dropped through total darkness for about 4 hours. 4 hours of descent. The ocean getting heavier and colder around them every minute. No sunlight, no radio contact with the surface, no ability to communicate with anyone above them, just 3 people inside a titanium ball, dropping through miles of water that most of humanity has never seen and never will. When they hit the bottom, they did not stop to take in the view. They went straight to work. Robotic arms reached out and scooped sediment off the ocean floor. Instruments pressed into the mud to measure what was there. Water samples were collected from just above the seafloor. Cameras filmed every inch of ground the vehicle moved across. Experiments that research teams had been designing for months ran automatically the moment they touched down. But one dive was never going to be enough to understand a place that nobody had ever properly studied. So between August and November of 2021, the team went back, and back, and back again. 33 separate dives into the Mariana Trench in a single expedition. Let that number land for a moment. In the 60 years between 1960 and 2020, fewer than a dozen humans total had ever reached Challenger Deep. China visited that same spot 33 times in just a few months. They mapped parts of the trench floor that had never been seen before. They documented geological features that no camera had ever recorded. They collected over 1,600 separate sediment samples from depths ranging between roughly 20,000 and 36,000 feet down. Then they brought all of it back to the laboratory and started going through it. And here is the detail that stopped researchers cold when they saw the data. Sediment is basically the soft, fine material that collects on the ocean floor over millions of years. It looks like gray mud. You could look at a jar of it and see absolutely nothing interesting. But when scientists ran those 1,600 samples through laboratory analysis, they found over 7,000 species of microscopic living things inside that sediment. Tiny organisms, some of them just a single cell in size, alive and active at the bottom of the Earth, in total darkness, under crushing pressure. Scientists expected to find some life down there. What nobody expected was the scale. 89% of those 7,000 species were completely unknown to science. Not rare, not hard to categorize, simply never seen by any human being anywhere in the world at any point in history. Think about what that means. Imagine going on a walk through a forest and realizing that nearly 9 out of every 10 trees are species that no scientist has ever recorded anywhere on Earth. That is what China's team found sitting in the mud at the bottom of the ocean. A thriving, ancient, hidden world that had been going about its business in total darkness for millions of years, while we were up here assuming it was empty. Some of these organisms survive in ways that do not match anything scientists had seen before. They run on chemistry instead of sunlight. They produce energy from chemical reactions happening in the rock around them rather than from any light source. Their biology does not fit the models scientists have spent decades building. But as wild as 7,000 unknown species sounds, the microbes were not even the biggest thing waiting at the bottom of the trench. Not even close. At 9,500 meters down, over 31,000 feet below the surface, the Fendu's cameras picked up something that nobody on the research team was prepared for when they reviewed the footage back on the surface. Tube worms. Thousands of them, up to 12 inches long, pale and almost glowing against the dark seafloor, swaying gently back and forth in a slow underwater current, like a field of tall grass bending in a breeze. Except this grass was 7 miles below the Pacific Ocean and had never once seen sunlight. Right next to them, covering the seafloor in every direction the camera could see, were clams. Not a few, not dozens, thousands, pressed together so tightly they looked like cobblestones on an old street in a city. These were not random creatures passing through. These were entire communities. Whole ecosystems built on the seafloor at the deepest accessible point on Earth, operating on their own rules, completely cut off from the world above them, running entirely on chemical energy leaking up through cracks in the ocean floor. No sunlight required, just water, chemistry, and time. China's team had just discovered the deepest and most extensive ecosystem of this kind ever recorded anywhere on Earth. And the moment scientists fully understood what they were looking at, a question started forming that had never been asked seriously before. A question that goes way beyond the Pacific Ocean, way beyond Earth. If life can survive with no sunlight, no warmth from above, under crushing pressure, in complete darkness, running entirely on chemicals seeping through cracks in rock, then where else in the universe could exactly the same thing be happening right now? For a long time, the basic assumption about finding life on other planets was that you needed the right conditions on the surface, the right distance from a star, enough warmth for liquid water, an atmosphere that could support things living up top. The idea was that life needs sunlight the same way we need air. Without it, nothing gets started. The Mariana Trench just proved that assumption wrong. Life does not need sunlight. It needs water, chemistry, and time. That is it. That realization immediately pointed attention at a moon of Jupiter called Europa. Europa is wrapped in a thick shell of ice. But underneath that ice, scientists believe there is an entire ocean of liquid water, kept from freezing not by the sun, but by the gravity of Jupiter itself, pulling and squeezing the moon as it orbits. If that underground ocean has chemical vents on its rocky floor, the same kind of cracks that fuel life at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, then it could have everything needed for life to exist. And it could have had those conditions for billions of years already. The same thinking applies to Enceladus, a moon of Saturn that scientists have already watched spraying water vapor out into space through cracks in its icy surface. Liquid water confirmed below the ice. If that water sits above a rocky floor with chemical activity, the conditions could be right for the same kind of life China found 7 miles under the Pacific. China's discoveries gave the scientific world something more useful than new species or impressive footage. They gave science a new set of rules. A place does not have to be warm, bright, comfortable, or close to a star to support life. It just needs the right chemistry and enough time. Suddenly, the universe looks a lot less empty. But here is the part of this story that is harder to sit with, and most people who watch the highlights of this expedition never hear it. Among the footage and the samples brought back from the deepest parts of the Mariana Trench, researchers found something that had no business being there: microplastics. Tiny fragments of plastic, pieces that had broken off from bags, bottles, food packaging, and everyday waste produced on the surface. They had drifted down through nearly 7 miles of ocean and settled into the sediment at the very bottom of the earth. And it was not just sitting there on the surface of the mud. When scientists tested the tissue of animals collected from the trench floor, they found plastic particles embedded inside the bodies of creatures living in one of the most remote places on the planet. Let that sink in for a moment. Challenger Deep is 7 miles below the surface. More people have stood on the surface of the moon than have ever visited it in person. It takes 4 hours just to reach the bottom by submersible. There is no current, no wave, no storm that carries surface water directly down to that depth. The trench is not connected to the surface in any direct way. Getting plastic down there would seem, on the surface, to be nearly impossible. And yet the plastic got there anyway, drifting slowly, breaking apart over years, sinking deeper and deeper, piece by microscopic piece, until it settled into the same mud where 7,000 unknown species had been living undisturbed for millions of years. The same mud where tubeworm forests had been swaying in total darkness since before humans existed. The same mud where entire food chains had been running on chemistry from the Earth's core, completely independent of anything happening above them, until our trash showed up. Here is the detail that changes how you see everything we covered in this video. If plastic has reached the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the deepest, most remote, least accessible place on the entire surface of this planet, then it has reached everywhere. There is no ocean depth too great, no ecosystem too remote, no species too isolated to have avoided contact with what we throw away. The same expedition that gave the scientific world one of its most exciting discoveries in decades also delivered one of its most uncomfortable realities in the same breath. We did not just find a hidden world. We found a hidden world that we had already begun to contaminate before we even knew it existed. Think about the timeline of that. Scientists did not know these species existed until China's expedition. These tubeworm forests had never been filmed. The chemical ecosystems running on those deep-sea vents had never been documented at this scale, or at this depth. The organisms in that sediment had never been named, and yet somewhere in the timeline, before China's cameras ever reached the bottom, our plastic had already arrived. We left our mark on a place we had never visited, a place most of us will never see even a photograph of, a place that was completely separate from our world in every meaningful way, running its own systems, following its own rules, sustaining life on chemistry from the Earth's interior, with zero connection to anything we were doing on the surface. And the plastic found it anyway. Now step back and look at the full picture of what China's expeditions actually produced. They built 3 generations of deep-sea vehicles in under 20 years, going deeper than any other nation had managed. They completed 33 dives to Challenger Deep in a single expedition, more visits to that spot than all other nations combined had achieved in 60 years. They collected over 1,600 sediment samples and found 7,000 species, 89% completely unknown to science. They documented the deepest and most extensive chemosynthetic ecosystem ever recorded on Earth. They gave the scientific world a new rule for where life can exist, rewriting the search parameters for life beyond our planet overnight. And in the same haul, they delivered evidence that human contamination has already reached the most remote place we have ever explored. That is not one story. That is 4 stories, colliding in the same set of samples from the same gray mud at the bottom of the same trench. And here is the thing that makes this bigger than any single discovery. The Mariana Trench represents less than a fraction of 1% of the ocean floor that has been properly explored. Scientists estimate that we have mapped and studied less than 20% of Earth's ocean floor in any meaningful detail. The deep ocean is the largest unexplored environment on our own planet. We know more about the surface of Mars than we know about what lives in the deepest parts of our own oceans, which means what China found is almost certainly not the exception. It is the preview. The 7,000 species in those samples, the tube worm forests, the clam beds, the organisms running on chemistry instead of sunlight, they are a glimpse into a world that almost certainly exists at similar scales across thousands of kilometers of unexplored trench floor. An entire parallel biosphere that has been running silently beneath our feet, beneath our oceans, for millions of years. Completely unknown to us, completely unstudied, and as the plastic evidence shows, already affected by us even before we had any idea it was there. The deeper we go, the more we find. And the more we find, the more it becomes clear that we have barely started asking the right questions about this planet, let alone anything beyond it. China went to the most hostile place on Earth, expecting to push the boundaries of what a machine could survive. They found a world that rewrote the rules of biology. They found evidence that those same rules might apply to moons orbiting Jupiter and Saturn right now. And they found proof that our reach, the reach of our waste, our carelessness, our everyday consumption, extends further than we had ever imagined. 7 miles down, total darkness, crushing pressure, no sunlight, no connection to the world above, and our plastic was already there waiting. So here is the question worth sitting with, after everything you just learned. China found over 7,000 species nobody had ever seen living at the very bottom of the ocean. Does that make you more excited that life might exist somewhere else in the universe? Or does finding plastic 7 miles down make you more worried about what we are already doing to this planet? Drop your honest answer in the comments. If this video made you see the ocean, or this planet, differently, hit like and subscribe, because the next discovery is already waiting somewhere in the dark.